Okay, today we will create a simple React Native app to understand the working of text inputs and buttons. Let's get started. I have already created and opened a React Native project, and the emulator is running. The index.js file calls the base app component. Now let's look inside the app component file. This is where we'll write our code. First, let's import React and the useState hook, as we will need state management. Next, we will import components from React Native, View, Text, Text Input, Alert, Touchable Opacity, and Style Sheet for styling. We'll create the app component using an arrow function. To complete the skeleton code, we'll return a basic text component for now. After that, we export the component and create a styles object using the style sheet. Once saved, we should see Hello World displayed on the emulator, confirming everything is working correctly. Next, we'll work on the layout. We will use the View component as the base container. Inside this, we'll add a text component for the heading, followed by a text input for the first input field. Below that, we'll have a touchable opacity that wraps a text component for the first button. Similarly, we'll add another text input for the second input field and another touchable opacity wrapping a text component for the second button. We'll populate these components with placeholder and text values. The heading will display Lab 1 Demo. The first button will display Enter, and the second button will display Reset. The placeholder for the first input field will be Enter Text, and the placeholder for the second input field will be Entered Text as displayed here. After saving, we can see the basic layout, but it looks very plain. Let's style it. First, we'll style the container to make the layout visually appealing. The container will use Flex 1 to take up the full screen. It will center the content using Justify Content, Center, and Align Items. Center with padding, 20 for spacing. The heading will have a font size of 24, green text color, a margin of 20 at the bottom, and bold text styling. The input fields will have a border width of 1, a border color of gray, and a border radius of 10 for rounded edges. We'll also add a margin of 15 at the bottom, set the width to occupy the full container, and set the font size to 16. Additionally, we'll add horizontal padding of 10 for spacing. For the second input field, which is non-editable, we'll create a separate style called Disabled Input. This will give it a light gray background and gray text color. We will make it non-editable by setting the editable property to false. The buttons will also be styled for a polished look. The Enter button will have a green background, vertical padding of 12, horizontal padding of 20, a margin of 15 at the bottom, and rounded edges with a border radius of 10. The button text will be styled with white text color, a font size of 16, and bold text. For the Reset button, we'll create a separate style to give it a red background for differentiation. Now, let's add functionality to the app. We'll use useState to manage two states, one for the first input field and another for the second input field. The value of the first input field will be bound to the first state, and the onChange text handler will update the state when the text changes. The second input field will display the second state value, but we won't allow editing. We'll also add additional properties to the second input field, such as multi-line to allow multiple lines, scroll enabled to enable scrolling, and text align vertical to align the text to the top. We'll implement two functions for the buttons. The first function, handleEnterPress, checks if the first input field is empty. If it is, an alert will appear prompting the user to enter text. Otherwise, it will concatenate the value of the first input field with the second input field, separated by a space, and then clear the first input field. The second function, handleResetPress, simply clears both input fields. Finally, we'll assign these functions to the onPress property of the respective buttons. Let's test the app. When we enter text in the first input field and press Enter, the text moves to the second input field. If there is already text in the second input field, it concatenates with a space. When the Reset button is pressed, both input fields are cleared. For long text, the second input field expands and allows scrolling due to the multi-line and scroll-enabled properties. This is our complete React Native app for handling text inputs and buttons. If you have any questions, let me know. Thank you.